Claire stood at the edge of the church garden holding an invitation she had read 4 times, and each time her hands trembled a little more. The envelope had her name written in gold ink, and inside was a wedding invitation from her younger sister Laura. It should have been a happy moment. Instead, something about the warmth in the letter felt too polished, too rehearsed, like a smile stretched over clenched teeth. Claire was 38 years old, unmarried, and had built a quiet, steady life around her work as a hospital administrator. She had never needed a husband to feel whole, but she had spent years listening to comments from relatives who thought otherwise. Every family gathering came with the same tired questions. When are you getting married? Don't you want children before it's too late? Laura, don't you worry about your sister? Laura was 29, engaged to a successful architect named Daniel, and about to have the wedding of the year. She had spent months selecting flowers, venues, and a designer gown that cost more than Claire's monthly salary. But underneath the excitement, Laura carried something darker, something she had never said out loud to anyone, not even to Daniel. She resented Claire. It had started when they were children. Claire was the one who got straight marks in school, the one their parents bragged about at dinner parties, the one who seemed to do everything right without even trying. Laura had always felt like the shadow trailing behind her older sister, the afterthought, the one people forgot to ask about. When Claire graduated with honors and their father cried with pride, Laura remembered standing in the back of the auditorium, clapping along, feeling invisible. Now, for the first time in her life, Laura had something Claire did not: a wedding, a ring, a future that looked, on paper, like everything a woman was supposed to want, and she intended to make sure everyone noticed the difference. She sat with her bridesmaid Chloe in a small cafe 2 weeks before the wedding, sketching out the seating chart on a napkin. "You're really putting her at that table?" Chloe asked, glancing at the names Laura had written. "She'll be fine," Laura said, twirling her pen. "It's just seating." The table she meant was tucked near the kitchen doors, filled with distant cousins, an elderly uncle who talked about his medical procedures in great detail, and a co-worker of Daniel's who had a habit of interrupting people mid-sentence. Laura had chosen every name on that table with purpose. She wanted Claire surrounded by people who would make her feel out of place, small, forgotten, the same way Laura had felt for years. "And the toast," Laura added, lowering her voice even though no one else was near. "I already talked to the officiant. He's going to say something about family, about how some people take longer to find happiness than others. Nothing mean, just enough." Chloe hesitated. She had known Laura since college and had never seen this side of her. Not this clearly. "That feels a little cruel, Laura." "She's had her whole life to shine," Laura said, and for a moment her voice cracked with an old, tired bitterness. "This is my day. Let her sit in the back for once." Chloe said nothing else, but she felt a small knot form in her stomach, the kind that comes when you sense something is about to go wrong and you are powerless to stop it. Meanwhile, Claire was doing something Laura did not know about. Twice a week, after her hospital shifts ended, Claire drove 40 minutes to their parents' house to care for their mother, Margaret, who had been diagnosed with early-stage heart failure the year before. Their father, Edward, worked long hours and struggled to manage the appointments, the medication schedules, the quiet fear that came with watching his wife grow weaker. Claire had quietly stepped into that role without asking for recognition. She cooked meals, drove Margaret to specialists, sat with her during long nights when her heart raced and her breath grew short. She had never told Laura, partly because Laura rarely called to ask about their parents, and partly because Claire didn't want sympathy or credit. She simply believed it was the right thing to do. On the night she received the wedding invitation, Claire sat beside her mother's bed, reading it aloud. "She wants me there," Claire said softly. "Maybe this is a chance for us to actually talk. It's been so long since we were close." Margaret reached for her daughter's hand. Her fingers were thin and cool. "Your sister has always struggled with feeling seen, Claire. I hope this wedding brings you both closer, not further apart." Claire smiled, though something uneasy lingered behind her eyes. She wanted to believe her mother was right. She wanted to believe that this wedding could be the beginning of healing two sisters who had drifted into two very different lives. She began preparing for the day with a hopeful heart, choosing a modest blue dress, practicing kind words she might say to Laura, imagining a version of the day where old wounds finally closed instead of deepened. She had no idea what was waiting for her. 2 days before the wedding, Laura met with the officiant, a calm, well-spoken man named Gregory who had performed dozens of weddings over the years. She handed him a folded note with a few lines she wanted included in his speech, phrases about patience and timing, about people who take the long road to happiness. Gregory read the note carefully, his brow furrowing slightly. "This feels a bit pointed, Laura. Are you sure you want me to include this?" "It's just a gentle joke," Laura said quickly. "Family humor. My sister will understand." Gregory nodded slowly, though something about her tone made him uneasy. He had officiated enough weddings to recognize the difference between playful teasing and something sharper hiding beneath polite words. Still, it was not his place to argue with the bride 2 days before her ceremony, so he tucked the note into his folder and said nothing more. That same afternoon, Nathan, Daniel's cousin and one of the groomsmen, overheard Laura instructing the wedding coordinator about the seating arrangement. "Make sure that table stays exactly where I planned it," Laura said, pointing to the chart. "Near the kitchen, not near the head table." Nathan glanced at the name written beside the table number. Claire. He didn't know much about the sister's history, but something about Laura's tone struck him as unusually cold for someone talking about her own sibling. He mentioned it briefly to Daniel later that evening while they set up chairs at the venue. "Is everything okay between Laura and her sister?" Nathan asked. "She seems tense whenever her name comes up." Daniel shrugged, distracted by the checklist in his hands. "They've never been super close, but I think it's fine. Weddings make everyone a little stressed." He had no idea how wrong he was. The night before the wedding, Claire sat in her apartment, ironing the blue dress she planned to wear, humming quietly to herself. She thought about her sister as a little girl, the way Laura used to follow her around the house asking to play, the way they used to build blanket forts and whisper secrets long after their parents said it was time for bed. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, that closeness had faded into distance, filled instead with awkward silences and forced smiles at holiday dinners. Claire hoped, more than anything, that tomorrow could be a small step back toward that old closeness. She had no way of knowing that on the other side of the city, Laura was reviewing her seating chart one final time, running her finger over Claire's name, feeling a strange, uncomfortable mixture of anticipation and guilt she refused to examine too closely. A week before the wedding, Claire had gone shopping for a gift, wandering through a small boutique near her apartment. She wanted something meaningful, something that captured the years they had shared as sisters despite the distance that had grown between them. She finally settled on a delicate silver bracelet engraved with both their birth years, a quiet symbol of the bond she hoped still existed somewhere beneath the surface. She wrapped it carefully in soft blue paper, tied it with a white ribbon, and placed a short handwritten note inside the box. The note read simply, "I am proud of you, and I hope we can find our way back to each other." She had rewritten that note 3 times before she felt it sounded right. Not too formal, not too emotional, just honest. On the other side of town, Laura spent that same week finalizing details with her wedding planner, a sharp, efficient woman named Sophie who had organized dozens of high-profile weddings across the city. Sophie noticed Laura's unusual insistence on controlling every small detail of the seating chart, far more than most brides typically cared about. "Most people leave this to me," Sophie said, reviewing the chart Laura had drawn by hand. "You've rearranged this 4 times already." "I just want everything perfect," Laura replied, avoiding eye contact. Sophie shrugged, used to demanding clients, and moved on to discuss flowers and lighting instead. She had no reason to suspect that the seating chart had less to do with perfection and more to do with old family wounds Laura had never fully healed from. That evening, Laura sat alone in her apartment after her fitting, staring at her reflection in the mirror wearing her wedding gown for the final adjustment. For a brief moment, doubt crept into her chest. She thought about the years she and Claire had spent as close sisters before adulthood pulled them into separate lives. She thought about calling Claire simply to talk, to laugh about something small, to remember what it felt like before jealousy took root between them. Instead, she picked up her phone and texted Chloe about final seating confirmations, pushing the doubt down into the same quiet place she had buried it for years. The morning of the wedding arrived with soft golden light spilling over the venue's manicured gardens. Flowers lined every path, string lights hung above the reception tent, and the air buzzed with quiet excitement as guests began to arrive in their finest clothes. Claire arrived early, her heart light with hope, her arms carrying a small wrapped gift for her sister. She scanned the growing crowd for a familiar face, smoothing the front of her blue dress, practicing the warm smile she planned to give Laura the moment she saw her. She had no idea that somewhere inside the bridal suite, her sister was staring into a mirror, adjusting her veil, and quietly rehearsing the calm expression she would wear while watching her plan unfold. The wedding was about to begin, and neither sister knew just how far the day would carry them from where they stood now. Guests filled the garden rows in soft pastel colors, fanning themselves gently under the warm sun, while a string quartet played near the entrance of the reception tent. Claire found her seat card near the welcome table and felt her stomach tighten the moment she read the table number printed beside her name. Table 12, near the kitchen doors. She told herself it was nothing, that seating charts were complicated and someone simply had to sit near the back. She walked toward the table with her gift tucked under her arm, greeting a few distant cousins she barely recognized, taking her seat beside an elderly uncle already deep into a detailed story about his recent knee surgery. Laura, meanwhile, stood in the bridal suite surrounded by her mother, Chloe, and 2 other bridesmaids, all fussing over her veil and the final touches of her makeup. Margaret arrived a few minutes later, her steps slow and careful, leaning slightly on Edward's arm as she entered the room. "You look beautiful," Margaret said, her voice trembling with emotion as she looked at her youngest daughter in her gown. Laura smiled, though her eyes drifted briefly toward the door, half expecting Claire to walk in and share this moment the way sisters were supposed to. She didn't come. Laura told herself it didn't matter, even as a small twinge of something uncomfortable settled in her chest. Outside, Daniel greeted guests near the garden archway, shaking hands and accepting congratulations with an easy, relaxed smile. He spotted Claire sitting near the back and walked over, genuinely pleased to see her. "Claire, I'm so glad you came," he said warmly. "Laura's been talking about the wedding non-stop for months." "I wouldn't have missed it," Claire replied, smiling despite the small ache building beneath her calm expression. Daniel lingered for a moment, glancing toward her table. "You're all the way back here? Let me see if we can move you closer." "No, please," Claire said quickly, not wanting to cause a scene. "This is fine, really." Daniel hesitated, sensing something unspoken, but the arrival of another guest pulled his attention away, and he moved on with a polite nod, unaware of the quiet storm building just beneath the surface of his bride's carefully planned day. The ceremony began soon after, guests rising as Laura walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her gown catching sunlight with every graceful step. Claire watched from the back, tears gathering in her eyes despite everything, because beneath all the tension, she still loved her sister, and still wanted this day to be beautiful for her. Gregory began the ceremony with warm, practiced words about love, patience, and commitment. Claire listened closely, feeling herself relax slightly, hoping the earlier unease had simply been her imagination. Then Gregory reached the portion of his speech Laura had specifically requested. "Some people find love early," he said, his tone light and conversational, "and some people take a little longer to find their path. Today, Laura and Daniel remind us that patience truly is rewarded, that good things come to those who wait, no matter how long the wait may feel." A ripple of soft laughter moved through parts of the crowd, the kind of laughter people give when they sense a joke but aren't entirely sure who it's aimed at. Claire felt her cheeks flush as several heads turned briefly in her direction, an unconscious reflex from relatives who understood exactly who those words were meant for. She kept her expression steady, folding her hands tightly in her lap, telling herself it was nothing, a harmless joke, the kind families made without thinking. But beside her, the elderly uncle chuckled and leaned toward her. "Sounds like they're talking about you, dear," he said, not unkindly, simply oblivious. Claire smiled thinly and said nothing, her throat tightening around words she refused to let escape. After the ceremony ended and guests began moving toward the reception tent, Chloe caught Claire's eye briefly across the garden. Something in Chloe's expression looked almost apologetic, though Claire couldn't understand why. She brushed the feeling aside and focused on finding her seat again, determined not to let a single comment ruin the day. Inside the tent, dinner service began, and Claire's table filled with the same collection of distant relatives and unfamiliar faces Laura had carefully selected weeks earlier. Conversation moved slowly, awkwardly, punctuated by long pauses and mismatched topics. Daniel's coworker interrupted 3 different attempts at conversation with stories about his recent business trip, while the elderly uncle continued detailing his medical history to anyone who would listen. Claire ate quietly, glancing occasionally toward the head table where Laura sat glowing beside Daniel, surrounded by laughter and warmth that felt worlds away from where Claire had been placed. Meanwhile, back at their parents' house, unaware of the tension building at the wedding, a home health aide who checked in on Margaret twice a week had left a message on Claire's phone that morning. One Claire hadn't yet had time to check. It mentioned a small change in Margaret's condition, nothing urgent, but worth discussing soon. Claire had planned to call back after the wedding, not realizing how much that small detail would matter later. As the evening continued, Laura moved between tables, greeting guests, laughing, accepting compliments about her dress and the beautiful venue. When she finally approached table 12, her smile faltered only slightly before settling back into practiced warmth. "Having fun?" she asked, resting a hand lightly on Claire's shoulder. "It's a beautiful wedding, Laura," Claire said honestly, standing to hug her sister. "I'm really happy for you." For a brief moment, something softened in Laura's expression, a flicker of the closeness they once shared. But then her gaze drifted toward the head table, toward Daniel's parents seated in places of honor, toward the life she had built that finally outshined her older sisters, and the softness hardened again into something colder. "I'm glad you could make it," Laura said simply, before moving on to the next table, leaving Claire standing alone with an uneasy feeling she couldn't quite name. Later that night, as the reception moved into dancing and celebration, Chloe found a quiet moment alone with Laura near the edge of the tent. "Are you happy?" Chloe asked carefully. "With everything today?" Laura watched the dance floor, watched Claire sitting alone at her table, while others danced and laughed around her. "I don't know," Laura admitted quietly. "I thought this would feel different." "Different how?" Laura hesitated, struggling to put years of complicated emotion into words. "I thought seeing her sit back there for once would feel like winning something. But it just feels—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Chloe placed a gentle hand on her friend's arm. "Maybe it's not too late to fix it." Laura didn't answer. Instead, she watched her sister rise quietly from her table, gather her purse, and slip toward the garden entrance alone, disappearing into the soft evening light without another word. What Laura didn't know, and wouldn't learn until much later, was that Claire had received a second message on her phone just minutes earlier, this one far more urgent than the first. It was from the home health aide, her voice tight with concern, asking Claire to call back immediately regarding their mother's condition. Claire stepped outside the reception tent, phone pressed to her ear, her heart pounding as she listened to details about Margaret's sudden shortness of breath and a hospital admission already underway. The celebration continued behind her, music and laughter drifting into the night air, completely unaware that somewhere just beyond the garden lights, one sister's world had just shifted into something far more serious than seating charts and quiet resentment. Claire closed her eyes, steadying her breathing, and made a quiet decision. She wouldn't ruin Laura's night, not yet. She would handle this alone, the way she always had, and slip away without drawing attention to herself. She had no idea how much that choice would matter in the days to come, or how differently everyone would see her once the truth finally came out. Claire drove through the dark streets with her hands tight on the wheel, still wearing her blue dress, mascara smudged slightly beneath her eyes from tears she hadn't realized she'd been crying. The hospital lights came into view ahead, and she parked quickly, rushing through the sliding doors toward the emergency department where a nurse directed her to a small curtained room. Margaret lay propped up in the hospital bed, an oxygen tube resting beneath her nose, her face pale but alert. Edward sat beside her, his tie loosened, his expression tight with worry. "She's stable," a doctor explained quietly to Claire as she entered. "Her heart rhythm became irregular earlier tonight. We're adjusting her medication and keeping her for observation, but she should recover well with rest." Claire exhaled a shaky breath of relief and moved to her mother's bedside, taking her hand gently. "I'm here now." "You should be at the wedding," Margaret whispered, though her eyes softened with gratitude despite her words. "You're more important," Claire said simply, and meant it completely. Edward looked at his older daughter with quiet admiration, the kind of look that came from years of watching her quietly hold their family together, without ever asking for recognition. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Claire." Claire smiled faintly, though exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. She had spent the entire evening absorbing small cruelties at her sister's wedding, only to rush straight into another kind of emotional weight without pause. Still, she stayed through the night, sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair, holding her mother's hand until Margaret finally drifted into peaceful sleep. Back at the reception, the celebration continued for another hour before Laura noticed Claire's prolonged absence. She scanned the tent, searching for her sister's blue dress among the dancing guests, feeling an unexpected flicker of worry she hadn't anticipated. "Have you seen Claire?" she asked Chloe, glancing toward the garden entrance. Chloe shook her head. "She left a while ago. I thought maybe she just needed air." Laura frowned, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach that she couldn't quite explain. She excused herself briefly and stepped outside into the cool night air, scanning the empty garden paths, but found no sign of her sister anywhere. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message. "Everything okay? You disappeared." No response came. Laura told herself Claire had simply gone home early, perhaps overwhelmed by the crowd or tired from the long day, and returned to the celebration, pushing the worry aside as Daniel pulled her onto the dance floor for their final dance of the night. The next morning, Laura woke in a hotel suite beside Daniel, sunlight streaming through the curtains, her body still humming with the exhaustion of the previous day. She reached for her phone and found a single text message waiting from her father, sent hours earlier. "Mom is in the hospital. She's stable now. Claire has been with her all night." Laura sat upright immediately, her heart pounding as she read the message twice, then a third time, disbelief and guilt colliding inside her chest. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked groggily, noticing her sudden stillness. "My mom," Laura said, her voice shaking. "She was in the hospital last night. Claire left the wedding to be with her." Daniel sat up quickly, concern washing over his face. "Is she okay? Why didn't anyone tell us?" Laura didn't answer immediately. She was too busy replaying the entire evening in her mind, remembering the seating chart, the officiant's speech, the moment she had watched Claire quietly slip away from the reception without a word of complaint, without making a single scene, even while dealing with something far more serious than anything happening at the wedding. Guilt settled heavily over Laura as she quickly dressed and rushed to the hospital with Daniel following close behind. When they arrived, they found Claire sitting exactly where she had been for hours, still in her wrinkled blue dress, her hair falling loose from its earlier style, dark circles forming beneath her tired eyes. "Claire," Laura said softly, stepping into the room. Claire looked up, offering a tired but genuine smile. "She's doing better. The doctors say she'll be fine with some rest and medication adjustments." Laura moved closer, glancing at their mother sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed, then back at her sister who had spent her wedding night sitting in an uncomfortable chair instead of celebrating at the reception. Something inside Laura cracked open, an old wall she had built years ago beginning to show its first real fracture. "Why didn't you say something last night?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could have told me. I would have come." "It was your wedding," Claire said simply. "I didn't want to ruin it." The words landed heavier than Claire intended, striking something deep inside Laura's chest. She thought about everything she had orchestrated over the past weeks, the seating chart, the officiant's pointed words, the quiet cruelty she had planned so carefully, all while her sister had spent months secretly caring for their mother without asking for a single word of thanks or recognition. Edward, exhausted from the sleepless night, finally spoke up from the corner of the room. "Claire has been doing this for almost a year now, Laura, driving out twice a week, sometimes more, managing appointments, sitting with your mother during the hard nights. She never told anyone because she didn't want the attention." Laura turned toward her sister, stunned. "A year? Why didn't you tell me?" Claire shrugged, exhaustion softening her usual composure. "You were busy with the wedding. And honestly, I didn't think you'd want to know." The unspoken accusation hung in the air between them, heavier than anything either sister had said aloud in years. Laura opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, unsure what words could possibly address the weight of everything Claire had just revealed. Daniel, standing quietly near the door, watched the exchange with growing unease. He had always assumed the sisters simply had a normal distant relationship, the kind many siblings experienced as adults with separate lives. He hadn't realized how deep the resentment ran, or how much Laura had been hiding beneath her calm, controlled exterior throughout their entire wedding planning process. A nurse entered the room briefly to check Margaret's vitals, offering a quiet reassurance that she was recovering well and would likely be discharged within a day or two. The interruption gave the family a moment to breathe, though the tension between the sisters remained thick and unresolved. Later that afternoon, while Margaret rested and Edward stepped out to speak with the doctor, Laura found herself alone with Claire in the small hospital room for the first time in years without other distractions pulling their attention away. "I need to tell you something," Laura said quietly, staring at her hands rather than meeting her sister's eyes. "The seating chart last night, I did that on purpose." Claire's expression shifted slightly, though she said nothing, waiting for her sister to continue. "I put you near the kitchen because I wanted you to feel the way I've felt my whole life," Laura admitted, her voice cracking. "Overlooked, forgotten. I told the officiant to make that comment about patience and timing. I wanted everyone to notice how different our lives turned out. I wanted, just once, to feel like the one people were proud of." Claire sat in stunned silence, processing the confession slowly. Part of her had suspected something was wrong the moment she saw her table assignment, but hearing it confirmed so plainly still landed like a physical blow. "I've always been proud of you," Claire said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I never once thought I was better than you, Laura. I just thought we were different people living different lives." "But everyone always compared us," Laura said, tears finally spilling over. Mom and Dad bragged about your grades, your career. I felt invisible standing next to you my entire childhood. And I felt invisible standing next to you the moment you got engaged, Claire admitted honestly. Everyone suddenly had something exciting to talk about. A wedding, a future. I just had my job and an empty apartment. I didn't resent you for it. I just felt lonely. The two sisters sat in silence for a long moment, decades of unspoken hurt finally rising to the surface between them, raw and uncomfortable, but undeniably honest for the first time in years. Outside the room, Edward returned with updated information from the doctor, unaware of the conversation unfolding inside, unaware that the wedding he had watched with pride the day before had been built, in part, on a foundation of quiet cruelty his youngest daughter had never intended anyone to discover. The truth was finally out in the open, but neither sister yet understood how far the consequences would reach once the rest of their family learned what had truly happened behind the scenes of Laura's wedding day. Word of what really happened at the wedding spread slowly over the following days, not through gossip or dramatic announcements, but through quiet conversations that carried more weight than either sister expected. Daniel, still processing everything he had learned in the hospital room, found himself unable to look at the wedding photos the same way when they arrived from the photographer a few days later. He sat at their kitchen table scrolling through the images on his laptop, pausing on a photo of Claire sitting alone at table 12, her expression polite but distant, surrounded by guests who barely acknowledged her presence. He thought about the officiant's comment during the ceremony, the ripple of laughter that had moved through certain sections of the crowd, and felt a heavy discomfort settle in his chest. "Did you know how bad it looked?" he asked Laura that evening, turning his laptop screen toward her. "Look at this table. Look how far away she is from everyone else." Laura stared at the photo, guilt tightening around her throat. "I know. I've been thinking about it constantly." "You planned this, Laura," Daniel said, his voice carrying more hurt than anger. "You told the officiant what to say. You arranged the seating specifically to embarrass your sister on the same day she found out our mother-in-law was rushed to the hospital, and she didn't even tell us because she didn't want to ruin our night." Laura had no defense left to offer. She had spent days replaying her sister's words in the hospital room, replaying the quiet dignity Claire had shown even after learning the truth about the seating chart and the officiant's speech. "I don't know how to fix this," Laura admitted quietly. "You start by talking to her," Daniel said. "Really talking, not just apologizing because you got caught." Meanwhile, Nathan mentioned the situation briefly to his mother, Daniel's aunt, during a family phone call, not realizing how quickly the information would travel through the extended family network. Within days, several relatives who had attended the wedding began piecing together the small cruelties they had witnessed, the seating arrangement, the officiant's pointed comment, the way certain bridesmaids had exchanged knowing glances during dinner. Chloe, feeling increasingly guilty about her role in helping plan the seating chart, finally called Claire directly one evening, her voice hesitant and nervous. "I should have said something sooner," Chloe admitted. "I knew it wasn't right, what Laura was planning, and I still helped with parts of it. I'm sorry, Claire." Claire, sitting in her apartment after a long shift at the hospital, listened quietly before responding. "Thank you for telling me. I appreciate you being honest now, even if it's late." The conversation was brief, but it added another layer to the growing awareness spreading through the family and friend circle surrounding Laura and Daniel's new marriage. An awareness that Laura's carefully constructed wedding day had been built on something far uglier than anyone initially realized. A week after the wedding, the extended family gathered for a previously planned dinner at Edward and Margaret's house, meant to celebrate Margaret's recovery and give everyone a chance to see her home safely from the hospital. What was meant to be a peaceful evening quickly became something far more tense. Laura arrived with Daniel, forcing a smile as she greeted relatives who seemed unusually quiet, unusually careful with their words around her. She noticed the shift immediately, the way conversations paused slightly when she entered a room, the way certain aunts and uncles avoided direct eye contact. During dinner, an older cousin named Victoria, known throughout the family for her blunt honesty, finally addressed the tension directly. "I heard what happened at the wedding," Victoria said, setting down her fork and looking directly at Laura across the table. "The seating, the comment during the ceremony. Is it true you planned all of it?" The table fell silent. Edward glanced up sharply, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning understanding as he looked between his two daughters. Laura's face flushed deeply, humiliation and shame washing over her in front of the entire extended family. She glanced at Claire, who sat quietly, offering no defense but no accusation either, simply watching the moment unfold with a calm, steady expression. "I did," Laura admitted finally, her voice barely audible. I planned the seating. I asked the officiant to include that comment. I wanted Claire to feel small, the way I've felt for years standing in her shadow. Margaret, still recovering but alert enough to follow the conversation, set down her own fork with trembling hands. Laura, how could you do something like that to your own sister? I don't know, Laura said, tears beginning to form. I've spent my whole life feeling like the less impressive daughter, like nothing I did ever measured up to Claire's achievements. I thought this was finally my chance to feel important. Edward's expression softened slightly, though his disappointment remained clear. We never meant to make you feel that way, Laura. We were proud of both of you, in different ways. It never felt that way, Laura said honestly. Every conversation always turned back to Claire's grades, Claire's career, Claire's accomplishments. I felt invisible. Claire, who had remained quiet through most of the exchange, finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. I never asked for that attention, Laura. I never wanted you to feel smaller because of it. If I had known you felt this way, I would have tried to change things between us years ago. The dinner table remained heavy with silence for a long moment, the weight of years of unspoken resentment finally settling visibly over the entire family. Victoria, seeing the raw emotion unfolding, quietly excused herself to the kitchen, sensing the conversation needed to continue without an audience. Margaret reached across the table, taking both her daughter's hands in her own trembling grip. I don't have the energy to pretend everything is fine anymore, she said softly. I love both of you more than anything in this world, and it breaks my heart to see how much pain has been building between you for so many years, without either of us noticing. Edward nodded in agreement, guilt evident in his tired eyes. Your mother and I should have paid closer attention. We should have made sure neither of you ever felt overlooked. Laura wiped tears from her cheeks, looking directly at her sister for the first time since sitting down for dinner. I'm sorry, Claire, truly sorry. What I did wasn't fair, especially not on a night when you were dealing with something so much more important than any wedding seating chart. Claire studied her sister's face carefully, searching for sincerity beneath the apology, and found something genuine there, buried beneath years of resentment and misunderstanding. I forgive you, Claire said quietly, though her voice carried a firmness that made clear forgiveness didn't erase everything that had happened. But we need to actually talk, Laura, really talk, not just apologize and move forward like nothing happened. Daniel, who had remained silent throughout the family confrontation, finally spoke up, addressing both sisters with quiet sincerity. I think that's exactly what needs to happen. No more secrets, no more competition, just honesty. The dinner ended quietly, without the usual laughter and light-hearted conversation that typically filled family gatherings, but with something more valuable settling into its place. The first fragile steps toward genuine understanding between two sisters who had spent decades misreading each other's pain. As guests began leaving that evening, Victoria pulled Claire aside briefly near the front door. For what it's worth, she said quietly, everyone at that wedding could see how gracefully you handled yourself, even sitting at that table. It said more about your character than anything Laura could have planned. Claire offered a tired but genuine smile. Thank you, Victoria. That means more than you know. Driving home that night, Claire replayed the entire evening in her mind, the confession, the tears, the fragile beginning of honesty between herself and her sister. She felt lighter somehow, despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders, as though years of unspoken tension had finally begun loosening its grip on both their lives. She had no idea that the following weeks would bring even more unexpected changes, not just to her relationship with Laura, but to her own life, in ways she never anticipated. 3 weeks passed after the family dinner, and slowly, cautiously, Laura and Claire began rebuilding something they hadn't shared in years, a genuine connection built on honesty rather than comparison. They started with small gestures, a coffee here, a short phone call there, careful conversations that avoided old wounds while gradually working up the courage to address them directly. During one of these coffee meetings, Claire mentioned something she had been considering for months, but never had the courage to pursue. There's a position opening at the hospital, Claire said, stirring her coffee absently. Director of Patient Services, my supervisor mentioned my name for it last week. Laura's eyes widened with genuine excitement. Claire, that's wonderful. Are you going to apply? I don't know, Claire admitted. It would mean more responsibility, more visibility. I've always preferred staying behind the scenes. Maybe it's time to stop staying behind the scenes, Laura said gently, surprising even herself with the sincerity in her voice. You deserve recognition for everything you do, Claire, not just at work, everywhere. The words carried weight coming from Laura, an acknowledgement of years spent unintentionally overshadowing her sister's quiet, consistent excellence with louder, more visible achievements of her own. Claire smiled, touched by her sister's encouragement. Maybe you're right. 2 weeks later, Claire submitted her application for the director position, spending long evenings preparing her presentation and reviewing her accomplishments over the past decade of hospital administration. She hadn't realized how much she had actually achieved until she sat down to compile it all into a formal document. Years of process improvements, cost savings initiatives, and patient satisfaction increases that had quietly transformed her department, without anyone outside her immediate team fully recognizing the scope of her contributions. During this same period, Laura found herself reflecting deeply on her marriage and her relationship with her sister, prompted largely by ongoing conversations with Daniel about honesty and vulnerability. She began seeing a therapist, something she had resisted for years, finally ready to address the insecurities that had driven her to plan such deliberate cruelty towards someone she genuinely loved. "I think I've spent so long comparing myself to Claire," Laura admitted during one particularly emotional session, "that I never learned to measure my own worth without her as a reference point." Her therapist nodded thoughtfully. "What would it look like to define your own value independently, without comparison?" Laura considered the question seriously for the first time in her adult life. "I think it starts with actually knowing my sister as a person, not just as a measuring stick I've used against myself for 30 years. Around this same time, Claire attended a work conference where she met a fellow hospital administrator named Oliver, a warm, thoughtful man who worked at a neighboring medical center. They struck up an easy conversation during a networking session, discovering shared interests in healthcare policy reform and, eventually, in each other. "You mentioned earlier you're up for a director position," Oliver said as they walked together during a break between conference sessions. "That sounds like incredible work." "It's a lot of responsibility," Claire admitted, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "But I think I'm ready for it." "You seem like someone who's always ready," Oliver observed, "even when things get complicated." Claire laughed softly, thinking briefly about the wedding, the hospital, the difficult conversations with her sister that had unfolded over the past month. "You have no idea." They exchanged contact information before parting ways, and over the following weeks, casual conversations turned into regular phone calls, then into dinner plans, then into something Claire hadn't allowed herself to consider in years, the possibility of genuine romantic connection with someone who valued her steady, quiet strength rather than overlooking it. Meanwhile, tensions between Laura and Claire continued softening as they spent more deliberate time together. During one visit to their parents' house, the two sisters found themselves alone in the kitchen, preparing dinner together for the first time in years. "I've been thinking about something," Laura said, chopping vegetables carefully. "All those years growing up, I never once told you how much I actually admired you. I was always too jealous to say it out loud." Claire paused, setting down her knife. "I admired you too, Laura. Your confidence. The way you could walk into any room and immediately connect with people. I never had that natural ease with others." "Really?" Laura asked, genuinely surprised. "Really," Claire confirmed. "I used to watch you at parties, making everyone laugh, making friends so easily, and wish I could do the same. I always felt awkward and stiff in social situations." The revelation struck both sisters with unexpected force, realizing how differently they had each perceived their own strengths and weaknesses, compared to how the other had actually seen them. Years of quiet envy on both sides had blinded them to the genuine admiration hiding just beneath the surface. "We wasted so much time," Laura said softly, tears gathering in her eyes. "We can't get that time back," Claire said, placing a gentle hand on her sister's arm. "But we can choose differently going forward." Their conversation was interrupted by Margaret entering the kitchen, moving more steadily now weeks after her hospital stay, her health improving with proper medication and rest. She paused in the doorway, watching her daughters cooking together with genuine warmth for the first time in longer than she could remember. "This is what I've wanted to see," Margaret said softly, tears of her own forming. "My girls, together, actually talking." The three women finished preparing dinner together, filling the kitchen with easy conversation and occasional laughter, a stark contrast to the tense, guarded interactions that had defined family gatherings for years prior. A month later, Claire received official news that she had been selected for the director position, a significant achievement that reflected years of dedicated, often unrecognized work. She called Laura immediately to share the news, unable to contain her excitement. "Laura, I got it, the director position. They offered it to me this morning." "Claire, that's incredible," Laura exclaimed, genuine joy evident in her voice, without a trace of the old jealousy that might have colored her reaction months earlier. "We need to celebrate. Dinner this weekend, my treat." The celebration dinner brought together the entire family, including Daniel, who had grown increasingly close to Claire over the past months as he witnessed her quiet strength and dedication firsthand. Oliver joined as well, having been formally introduced to the family a few weeks earlier during a smaller gathering, his warm presence quickly earning approval from Edward and Margaret. During dinner, Edward raised his glass for a toast, his voice thick with emotion. To Claire, for her incredible achievement, and to both my daughters, for finding their way back to each other after too many years apart. Glasses clinked around the table, genuine warmth filling the room in a way that felt entirely different from the tension that had defined Laura's wedding reception months earlier. Laura watched her sister laughing with Oliver, glowing with well-deserved recognition and happiness, and felt nothing but genuine pride, a feeling that surprised her with its purity, untangled from any lingering resentment or comparison. After dinner, as guests began saying their goodbyes, Laura pulled Claire aside for a private moment. "I know I can never fully make up for what I did at the wedding," Laura said sincerely, "but I want you to know how proud I am of you, Claire. Not because you're my measuring stick anymore, but because you genuinely deserve every good thing happening in your life right now." Claire embraced her sister warmly, years of tension finally dissolving into something resembling the closeness they had shared as children. "Thank you for saying that. It means everything to me." As the sisters stood together in the quiet aftermath of the celebration, neither could have predicted just months earlier how far they would travel from the painful wedding day that had once threatened to permanently fracture their relationship. Instead, that painful day had become the unexpected catalyst for genuine healing, forcing both sisters to confront truths about themselves and each other they had avoided for far too long. Yet even as their relationship healed, one final conversation remained ahead of them, a conversation that would require both sisters to fully reckon with the past in order to build something stronger for their future together. 6 months after the wedding, Laura invited Claire to her apartment on a quiet Sunday afternoon, wanting to have the one conversation they had both been avoiding since the family dinner where everything first came into the open. She had spent the morning preparing tea, arranging a small plate of pastries, trying to create a calm, comfortable setting for what she knew would be an emotionally difficult discussion. Claire arrived promptly, noticing immediately the careful effort Laura had put into the afternoon, a stark contrast to the careless cruelty that had defined the seating chart months earlier. "Thank you for coming," Laura said, gesturing for Claire to sit on the couch. "I've been wanting to have this conversation properly for a while now." Claire settled into the seat, accepting a cup of tea. "I'm listening." Laura took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I need to explain everything, from the beginning, not to excuse what I did, but because I think you deserve to understand where it came from." Claire nodded silently, giving her sister space to continue. "When we were kids," Laura began, "I used to sit in your shadow at every family event. Every report card, every school award ceremony, every conversation with relatives, always circled back to your achievements. I started believing, somewhere along the way, that I simply wasn't as good as you, that I would always be the less impressive daughter." "I never saw it that way," Claire said softly. "I always thought you had this natural charisma I could never match." "I know that now," Laura said, "but back then, all I felt was invisible, and when Daniel proposed, when we started planning the wedding, something inside me saw an opportunity to finally feel like the one people were proud of. I convinced myself that making you feel small would somehow make me feel bigger." "Did it work?" Claire asked quietly. Laura shook her head slowly. "No, it felt hollow the entire time, even while I was planning it. And then, when I found out what you'd actually been doing, caring for Mom for an entire year without telling anyone, driving out twice a week, sitting through difficult nights, I realized how small and petty my own actions truly were compared to the quiet strength you'd been showing our family the entire time." Claire set down her teacup, considering her sister's words carefully. "I forgave you months ago, Laura, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting how much that day hurt. I sat at that table, listened to that comment during the ceremony, and felt smaller than I had felt in years. It wasn't just about the seating chart. It was everything it represented, years of feeling like our family only valued certain kinds of success." "I understand that now," Laura said, tears forming in her eyes. "And I'm genuinely sorry, not just for that day, but for every year before it where I let jealousy poison how I treated you." The two sisters sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of years finally settling into something more peaceful between them. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said eventually. "Anything. Are you happy? In your marriage? In your life? Not compared to me, not compared to anyone. Just genuinely happy?" Laura considered the question seriously. "I think I'm learning to be. Therapy has helped me understand that my happiness can't depend on comparing myself to you or anyone else. Daniel has been incredibly patient while I work through all of this. I'm glad, Claire said sincerely. You deserve genuine happiness, Laura, not the kind built on proving something to other people. And you? Laura asked. Things with Oliver seem to be going well. Claire's expression softened at the mention of his name. They are. He makes me feel valued in a way I didn't realize I was missing, and the new position at the hospital has been challenging in the best way possible. I'm proud of you, Laura said, and this time the words carried none of the old bitterness that might have once colored such a statement. Genuinely, completely proud. Claire smiled, reaching over to squeeze her sister's hand. I'm proud of you too, Laura, for being honest about all of this. It takes real courage to admit when you've hurt someone you love. As the afternoon continued, the sisters talked more openly than they had in years, discussing childhood memories, current struggles, hopes for the future, gradually rebuilding a foundation of trust and understanding that had been buried beneath decades of unspoken comparison and resentment. Before Claire left that evening, Laura handed her a small wrapped box. I wanted to give you something. A late wedding thank you gift, I suppose, though it feels strange to call it that given everything that happened. Claire opened the box carefully, finding inside a delicate silver bracelet nearly identical to the one she had given Laura months earlier, engraved with both their names and the words, "Sisters Always," written in small, elegant script. I saw the one you gave me, Laura explained, her voice thick with emotion, and I wanted us to have matching ones. A reminder that no matter what happens, we're still sisters, still connected, even when we lose our way sometimes. Claire embraced her sister tightly, tears finally spilling over for both of them. It's perfect, Laura. Thank you. 1 year after the wedding, the family gathered again, this time for a much different occasion, a small celebration marking Claire's engagement to Oliver, who had proposed during a quiet weekend getaway just weeks earlier. The gathering took place in Edward and Margaret's backyard, filled with warm laughter, comfortable conversation, and none of the careful tension that had once defined every family interaction between the two sisters. Laura stood beside Claire as she showed off her engagement ring to eager relatives, genuinely thrilled for her sister's happiness, without a single trace of the old jealousy that might have once tainted the moment. When's the wedding? Victoria asked eagerly, remembering all too well the complicated history surrounding Laura's own ceremony the previous year. We're thinking next spring, Claire said, glancing at Oliver with a warm smile. Something small and intimate, just close family and friends. And I'll make sure the seating chart is perfect, Laura added with a small, self-deprecating laugh, the comment landing as a shared moment of healing rather than lingering pain between the sisters. Claire laughed genuinely, squeezing her sister's hand. I trust you completely. The comment carried weight far beyond its light-hearted delivery, a quiet acknowledgement of how far both sisters had traveled since that painful wedding day, from calculated cruelty and quiet resentment to genuine trust and mutual support. As the sun began setting over the backyard gathering, casting warm golden light across the assembled family, Margaret watched her daughters laughing together near the dessert table, their heads bent close in easy conversation, and felt a deep, peaceful gratitude settle over her heart. They finally found their way back to each other, she said softly to Edward, who stood beside her watching the same scene. It took a difficult journey, Edward agreed, but I think they're stronger for it now, both of them. Margaret nodded, watching Claire throw her head back in genuine laughter at something Laura had said, watching Laura's face light up with real joy rather than practiced performance, and understood that whatever painful lessons the wedding had taught both her daughters, they had ultimately learned exactly what they needed to build something far more valuable than any perfectly planned celebration, a genuine, honest relationship built on mutual respect rather than quiet competition. The wedding day that had once threatened to permanently damage their relationship had instead become the unexpected turning point that finally brought two sisters back together, stronger and more honest than they had ever been before, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when both people were willing to confront the truth and choose forgiveness over resentment. As the evening wound down and guests began saying their goodbyes, Claire and Laura found themselves standing together near the garden gate, watching the last golden light fade from the sky. Thank you for forgiving me, Laura said quietly. I know I didn't make it easy. Thank you for finally being honest, Claire replied. That took real courage. The sisters embraced one final time before parting ways for the evening, both carrying with them a renewed sense of connection that had been years in the making, forged not through comparison or competition, but through vulnerability, honesty, and the willingness to finally see each other clearly for the first time in far too long. Spring arrived, and with it came Claire's wedding day, a small, intimate ceremony held in the same backyard where her engagement had been celebrated months earlier. Unlike the grand, elaborate affair Laura had orchestrated the year before, Claire's wedding reflected her quiet, steady personality: simple white flowers, soft candlelight, and a guest list limited to close family and a handful of dear friends. Laura arrived early that morning, not as a guest but as her sister's chosen maid of honor, a role that would have seemed impossible to imagine just a year earlier. She helped Claire into her gown, a simple, elegant dress far less extravagant than Laura's own wedding attire had been, adjusting the delicate lace sleeves with careful, practiced hands. "You look beautiful," Laura said, meeting her sister's eyes in the mirror. "Thank you for being here," Claire said softly. "Not just today, but for everything over the past year." Laura squeezed her sister's shoulder gently. "There's nowhere else I would rather be." Outside, guests gathered in the same backyard where Margaret and Edward had watched their daughters slowly rebuild their relationship over the previous months. Oliver stood beneath a simple wooden arch decorated with white roses, his expression a mixture of nervous excitement and genuine joy as he waited for Claire to walk toward him. When the ceremony began, Claire walked down a short garden path on her father's arm, Laura standing proudly among the small wedding party, watching her sister's face glow with a happiness that felt entirely earned after years of quiet sacrifice and overlooked dedication. The officiant, a close family friend rather than someone hired for the occasion, spoke simply and warmly about love built on honesty and mutual respect, words that carried particular significance given everything the family had experienced together over the past year. As the ceremony concluded and Claire and Oliver shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Laura felt tears of genuine happiness streaming down her face, unclouded by any trace of the old jealousy that had once poisoned her perspective on her sister's achievements and joys. During the reception, held beneath simple string lights strung across the backyard, Laura rose to give a toast, her hands trembling slightly with nervousness as she looked out at the gathered guests. "A year ago," Laura began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I made a terrible mistake at my own wedding. I let years of jealousy and insecurity convince me that hurting my sister would somehow make me feel better about myself. I was wrong, and it took nearly losing my relationship with the person I admire most in this world to understand exactly how wrong I had been." The backyard fell quiet, guests listening intently as Laura continued. "Claire has spent her entire life quietly taking care of the people she loves, without ever asking for recognition or credit. She cared for our mother through a difficult year without telling anyone. She forgave me for something unforgivable, and helped me become a better sister, a better person. Today, watching her marry someone who truly sees and values everything special about her, I couldn't be prouder to call her my sister." Laura raised her glass, her voice growing steadier with each word. "To Claire and Oliver, may your marriage be built on the same honesty and mutual respect that helped heal my relationship with my sister this past year. I love you, Claire, more than words can properly express." Applause and warm laughter filled the backyard as Claire rose to embrace her sister, both women crying openly now, the moment carrying far more emotional weight than any typical wedding toast. "That was perfect," Claire whispered against her sister's shoulder. "Thank you." As the reception continued into the evening, Margaret watched her daughters dancing together during a slow song, laughing and swaying with genuine joy, their earlier estrangement feeling like a distant memory, rather than a wound that had once threatened to permanently separate them. "I never thought we would see this day," Margaret said quietly to Edward, watching their daughters together. "Neither did I," Edward admitted, "but I'm grateful they found their way here." Later that night, as guests began departing and the celebration wound down, Claire and Laura found a quiet moment together, near the same garden gate where they had stood the previous year, during Laura's own emotional reconciliation. "Do you remember standing here last year?" Laura asked, glancing toward the darkened garden path. "I remember," Claire said softly. "It feels like a different lifetime now." "It is, in a way," Laura said. "We're different people than we were then. Better people, I think." Claire nodded in agreement, looking out at the fading lights of the reception behind them. "I'm grateful for how far we've come, even though the path here was difficult." "Would you do anything differently?" Laura asked, curiosity evident in her voice. "If you could go back to my wedding day, knowing everything that would happen afterward?" Claire considered the question seriously before answering. "I don't think so. As painful as that day was, it forced both of us to finally confront years of unspoken resentment we might have carried silently, for the rest of our lives otherwise. Sometimes the most painful moments become the necessary catalysts for real healing. Laura smiled, pulling her sister into a warm embrace. I love you, Claire. Thank you for giving me the chance to become a better sister. I love you too, Claire replied, holding her sister tightly. And thank you for finally being honest, even when it was difficult. As the two sisters stood together beneath the star-filled sky, surrounded by the fading warmth of Claire's wedding celebration, both understood that their relationship had been fundamentally transformed by the painful events of the previous year. What had once been a foundation built on comparison, jealousy, and quiet resentment had evolved into something far stronger, a bond built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine love that no amount of external comparison could ever threaten again. In the months that followed, Laura and Claire continued strengthening their relationship, regular sisterly dinners becoming a cherished tradition, honest conversations replacing the careful, guarded interactions that had once defined their adult relationship. Margaret's health continued improving steadily, and the entire family found themselves gathering more frequently, drawn together by the genuine warmth that had finally replaced years of quiet tension. Laura's marriage to Daniel grew stronger as well, deepened by her ongoing work in therapy and her renewed commitment to building her own sense of self-worth, independent of comparison to others. She found herself pursuing new interests and personal goals, no longer defining her achievements solely in relation to her sister's accomplishments. Claire's career continued flourishing in her new director role, her quiet leadership style earning respect and admiration throughout the hospital, while her marriage to Oliver provided the steady, genuine partnership she had long deserved but never quite believed she would find. Looking back, both sisters recognized that the painful wedding day, filled with calculated cruelty and unexpected revelation, had ultimately become the necessary turning point their relationship desperately needed. Sometimes the deepest wounds, when finally exposed to honest light, become the very foundation upon which genuine healing and lasting connection can finally be built. Years later, when Laura and Daniel welcomed their first child, a daughter they named after both grandmothers, Claire stood proudly beside her sister in the hospital room, holding her newborn niece with the same quiet devotion she had once shown caring for their mother during difficult times. She's beautiful, Claire whispered, gently rocking the infant in her arms. I hope she grows up close to her cousin someday, Laura said, watching her sister with the tiny baby, thinking ahead to the family Claire and Oliver were building of their own, the way we should have stayed close all those years. She will, Claire said confidently, smiling down at her niece. We'll make sure of it. And in that quiet hospital room, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle warmth of new beginnings, both sisters understood that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound not by competition or comparison, but by the genuine, hard-won love that had finally, truly, brought them home to each other.